Discussions in this show should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult your investment professional before making important investment decisions. Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research, a broker-dealer member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services through Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Houston First Financial Group are not affiliated.
Welcome to Money Matters with Chris Hensley, where we spotlight financial literacy issues in the Houston community and beyond. And now your host, Chris Hensley.
Good morning, everybody. You're listening to Money Matters. I'm Chris Hensley. We have a fantastic show lined up for you today. We have with us Steve Hamoen. He is a passionate entrepreneur. He is the host of Money Mindset and Mentoring. Steve, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I'm going to share a little bit of your bio with listeners to get to know you. We've talked and I met you last week and I think we're going to have a good match here. But let me just share a little bit for listeners to get to know you here. Now you're a seasoned entrepreneur, a sales expert. You have a career that's been dedicated to guiding ambitious entrepreneurs toward achieving their financial goals. Tell us a little bit something about yourself outside of the bio so listeners can get to know you a little bit better.
Well, thank you. And so outside of the bio, one of the things that I'm really passionate about, number one, I love success in all aspects. So I love success in business, I love success in family, and I love success in health. And, from the family perspective, got 3 amazing kids. My wife and I, we've been married for over 15 years. And from the health side, I teach and coach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Do you?
Morning.
Okay.
So, yeah.
There you go. I'm a blue belt. I didn't know that. We're going to have a good conversation.
Oh, we are going to have a very good conversation. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, keep going. I'm sorry I interrupted.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I've been training for about 10 years in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So, yeah.
Nice.
Also a blue belt, actually.
Nice. I'm at the 5-year mark, but I took a breather during COVID, so I've been back. Once we were able to get back to training, but there's been a cost, so I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Well, awesome. Well, that's good to know, man. So I think we have a lot of stuff in common here. We'll have a great conversation. And I want to just start, we'll get right into it. Tell me a little bit about what inspired you to start Money Mindset and Mentoring, your podcast, and how your own entrepreneurial journey influenced this decision.
So that's a great question. I mean, I think, many times you sit there and you have conversations with people. And you're either having a conversation that's just hysterical and you're thinking, man, this is like a conversation that people would listen to. Or you're having a conversation that's deep and impactful and you think the same thing. And so I thought, what, why don't I just put this out there? And because, one of the things I think is I know a lot of really great people, but their stories never get heard. So it's the idea of allowing their stories to kind of get out there and get their messaging out there. Because a lot of them have gone over so many mountains, whether again it's financial, whether it's in their personal or physical journey. I think getting that message out that the normal person can achieve great things. I think that's a very important message.
I love that. So really, I mean, you've been in these situations where you've had, people, you've been in these situations where you've had these conversations and you're saying, these stories need to get out there. People need to know about that. And that kind of was the domino that got you started on Money Mindset there. Now you did a podcast prior to that one as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I did a release of the podcast earlier on, and I just felt that I needed to re-release the podcast. So it's actually the same podcast. We re-released it in a way that I think, is to kind of change the way that the structure was. I mean, you do something once. It's like Grant Cardone when he released his first book, one of these books, Sell or Survive. He put Sell or Survive out, and, he liked it, but then I guess the life saving device in the front kind of got old. So then he switched it to Sell or Be Sold and re-released that again. And I think, that's kind of, I went through the same mindset.
I love it. Kind of a redesign, a rebrand.
Yeah, just rebrand.
we're hitting the 10-year anniversary here for Money Matters, and so I know over the last 10 years what we started with and where we're at now has changed. It's and so going back and kind of narrowing or changing your focus on it is huge. And then you mentioned Grant Cardone, which I'm also going to give you a high five for that. Grant Cardone, love Grant Cardone. Anytime I need a good swift kick in the butt, I'll put his 10X book on Audible and listen to it. It's like a vitamin for your brain, right? It really kind of helps keep us accountable,
Well, we've got a lot in common on that. In the take the vitamin for the brain, and then go to jujitsu and take the vitamin for the body.
Exactly. That's even when our brain's not online, sometimes our bodies needs it, right? So this is the way when I'm managing millions of dollars a day. I'm able to switch my brain off and move to a different system when I'm doing jujitsu. It is one of my biggest stress relievers there. So hopefully the listeners will relate to this.
Yeah, what got you into that journey? Just out of curiosity, what opened the door to say, hey? Because if you started 5 years ago, you're don't take this in any way other than a positive. You're not a spring chicken.
Yeah.
And so what made you think later in life, hey, I just want to go and get on some mats and choke some people?
Yeah, so I don't know how interesting this story is, but I have a 13-year-old now. And I put him into jujitsu as, hey, let's get him some discipline, let's get him some structure, let's get him off the couch, have him stop playing video games, right? So I put him in there, and then it inspired me to see how devoted he was to doing it at the time. It just kind of lit a spark in me. Now I'm 49, so you're right, I'm no spring chicken. In fact, not only am I no spring chicken, I wasn't an extremely athletic person. I was somebody that got picked last in PE in physical education most of my life. And then I just something pointed me into this. It may have been the more than the competition aspect, because I do compete, nice. But more of a just challenging yourself on a day-to-day basis. And I think that drove me into jiu-jitsu. Fast forward 5 years later, my son Alistair's no longer doing it. He decided it's not his thing. He never made it back after COVID. I can't stop. Even though I took the break, I have to keep going. It's one of the biggest stress relievers for me, and it's just a really good thing in my life. So that's awesome that this is something that you're doing as well. We're seeing a pattern here, right? It may not be jujitsu, but this is a thing that's for people that are successful, that are doing stuff. That this seems to be a pretty good pattern there.
Well, look at Mark Zuckerberg and all of the greats of industry are really jumping on board.
It's true. And we've seen that. If you've been doing it for 10 years, you've seen kind of how it's just kind of ramped up and it keeps going and going. So that's a huge thing. So I'm going to pivot for just a second, because I know we could probably do a whole hour long on jiu-jitsu. I have to put some guardrails on myself, because I will literally talk. I will talk your ear off on that. So, but now going back to your podcast, in your podcast, you often discuss overcoming challenges. What has been the biggest obstacle that you've faced in your career, and how did you overcome it?
I think there's been many. One of the things that you try to identify what the biggest one is. And, I started being self-employed back in 2005. Started an HVAC business back then, ran that for, till about 2014, where I, ran into some really tough customers, 2012 to 2014, who, didn't pay their bills. And, we ran into situations where went through hyperinflation and, materials quadrupled in value and cost, but my contract were fixed. So, you have delinquencies and you have overages, and then you have, a lot of manufactured defects. It was a very tough time. And so I ended up shutting the business down at that point, under duress. It was a wonderful business. We were doing some of the largest houses in Canada, 55,000 square feet we'd be working in. These are palaces. So technically it was very good, but financially it was ruining us, my family. And so when I shut it down, we were probably, near just $750,000 in the hole at that point in 2014 when it finally closed the doors. And so I had to figure out what to do. And I had 2 kids at the time. My second son was just born. It was right around this time actually, because it was his birthday yesterday. And so luckily I had a landlord for my commercial location. She was a real estate agent, and she said, "Why don't you become a real estate agent?" I said, "Most real estate agents are slime balls, right?" And she said, "Well, Steve, I'm a real estate agent. Do you think I'm a slime ball?" I said, "Well, you're not." And she said, "Well, then you don't have to be one either." I said, "Okay, fine. I'll do this for a short period of time." Well, that turned into 10 years. And, my first year of real estate, I sold, I think it was around 43 houses in the first year of real estate. And so for a real estate agent, that's quite a bit. But I had a big why, right? Like I had a motivation. I had to get this thing solved. I paid off all my small suppliers first. I paid off the government last, which apparently I should have done in the opposite way. But, my integrity was I'm not going to sting, Bob in a truck, and I'm not going to sting the guys. Even though I got stung, I don't want them to feel the same pain that I do. And so integrity to me is everything. And so got through that, and fast forward to today, we own a bunch of properties. We got a couple different businesses. Things are trucking along really nice. We have net worth rather than net negative. And I think that's a hurdle. I mean, it's not as big as some other people's hurdles, but it definitely was one that really you had to really work through.
I love it. I love it. And I see a pattern with entrepreneurs that are successful. There's always a story like yours, not the same story, but like yours, where they've had this big adversity and they've overcome it and they've stuck with it. So that is just to share with the listeners. That's huge. Now you're in Canada. You mentioned that. I'm here in Houston and Texas, and HVAC repair. We have to have air conditions here, right?
I was just out in Austin.
Canada.
Yeah.
Canada, I could see where that's a little bit of a different thing. It's colder up there. You actually have seasons, so compared to here where it's just hot and a little bit. We get winter for like a week or so.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you focus on in the podcast is mentorship. How has mentorship shaped your entrepreneurial journey, and why do you emphasize it so strongly in your podcast?
It gives me chills when you say that, because it's something that I didn't really think about when I was younger. When I first started into wrestling, and we're going to go off on a tangent for 30 seconds. When I first started into wrestling in high school, I didn't have a coach. I just wanted the wrestling. I went from one school to another. We didn't have a coach, so I had to start the whole program. I had to start everything, and I had a coach that come in and near the tail end of it, but it was hard to get things going. But once I had the coach, it went really well. And then when I ran into business, I had some, we'll call them coaches, but unfortunately they were giving me a lot of bad advice. And so I would do things that were put my business into peril, because the coach was driving me down a path that was just the wrong path. And if you look at that TSN turning point of 2014, when I was working with that real estate agent, she showed me so many things that I needed to be able to get that massive success quickly. Because to do that in 1 year, that you need to have somebody to give you speed. So sometimes coaches, I think the first thing they're going to do in mentors, they're going to give you speed. They're going to give you clarity. They're going to give you stability, because they're going to hold you either accountable, or they're going to show you the what nots to do just as much as the what to do. I think so many times, you have these coaches out there and they'll have a framework, but they're not going to show you really what to do, and they're not going to have one of the things I love about Grant, to be honest, is that, he just celebrated in their coaching 50,000 coaching calls, right?
Wow, that's a lot.
So they have recorded 50,000 coaching calls. Each of those coaching calls gets broken down. Now you can imagine how fast those coaching calls are getting broken down now, given the fact that he's got AI to go through all of those coaching calls to start taking that apart. I'm not saying he's doing that, but that's what I would do, is, to try to find, when do people connect? When do people disengage? Are people following the system for success? Are they tracking up when they're engaging and down? You can get a lot of analytics when you do 50,000 coaching calls. And I think there's a lot of coaches out there that, don't have that as a baseline. They don't have a framework for success, and they just, they're not going to get you to where you need to be. And I think the mentor or coach, whatever you want to call it, I think they've got to have a system of success that they can say it's repeatable and relied on. Because one of the things that Brandon Dawson, who works with Grant Cardone, says, and I agree with this wholeheartedly, is that if somebody's going to give you advice, free advice is the worst because it's worth exactly what you paid for. But the next bit of advice is looking at saying, okay, well, have they done it? That what they're asking you to do, have they done it? Or can they reference somebody that they helped do it? Because if they can't do that, then how are they coaching you? And I think a lot of people rely on people who are not in the business of what they're in to give them advice. And that can be very toxic. Whereas if you get somebody that's their rhythm, that's their thing. My first coach, Michelle, she would never call herself a coach or a mentor. We were business adjacent, we were business partners. And so, but that's how she coached me.
Right,
so it was fantastic, yeah. And she was very successful, still is today. She's a beast.
I love it. I love it. So that's a lot. So let me unpack some of this stuff, because as a solopreneur, this is a lot of really good information. It is very easy to, no man is an island, right? It's very easy to be a solopreneur and be out there floating by yourself, right? And you mentioned, having a good coach, they give you the clarity, they give you the accountability. And it may not fit, whether you want to call it a coach or a mentor or even put a label on it. We've all worked with people that have kind of shaped our path to success, right? And so this is huge. And you mentioned even in your own personal experience that this was a turning point, right? So I think this is something that the takeaways for the listeners here. So let me ask you this. Could you share maybe a particularly inspiring success story from your podcast, from one of your podcast guests that's resonated with you, something that's stuck?
There's so many good guests that I've spoken with. I'm going to pick one fellow just because, one of the things that we're seeing is in Canada, we see a very heavy amount of immigration. And immigration is a very polarizing discussion. And his story, I think, is a really great story. He came from India, came to Canada, and, he saw a situation where people were coming to Canada. They didn't really know how to, find really good housing, because in Canada right now, housing costs are skyrocketing. And when you're coming over from India, you might not have the wherewithal, whether through your job or, through what you're bringing, to be able to support your family in the way that is classically able to be done. So he created this business. It's called Hailtail, and he created this business that allowed you to be able to cohabitate people in a house in a way that it's beneficial as a win-win, both for the landlord as well as for the tenants. Because a lot of times people think that's an adversarial relationship. I truly don't think it is. I think if you have a really good product, you've got really good people, it's actually it's cohesive. They both rely on each other. And so in this situation, what he did is he created the environment for different immigrants to be able to rent out rooms in a house rather than rent out the whole place. It was at a slight surcharge. So for the landlord, there's a massive benefit, because you can take a cap rate of say a 5 cap and put it up to like an 8 cap, when you're looking at your property. But for the tenant, it gives a really good experience because they're able to move in. They have a sense of community. A lot of people think, oh, that's crazy. And it's like, well, did you ever watch the show Friends? That's what that was.
Yeah.
That is cohabitation. Nobody ever thinks about that. Like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. So if Joey can do it, then yeah, I can have tenants do it too. And so I think that was a great story. And so he took something that was his personal experience and did it in a way that he could build a beautiful business around it and create success for new immigrants. I mean, we had, I think it was like 463,000 new immigrants come to Canada in the last 3 months. And while from an American perspective, that doesn't seem like a whole bunch, when you take the percentage of, the population that we have in Canada, that is
per capita, yeah.
The per capita is huge. Yeah.
Well, that's that. So that is a very good example there. A unique business model using cohabitation for immigrants. I mean, we're here in Houston, and so Texas, the Hispanic population, huge. This is something that could, potentially work here as well. What a great success story, because he himself was an immigrant and he came and he built this. Was it called a Hail Tale? What is the name?
HALETALE. Yeah, yeah.
I love
He's
it. I
actually
love it.
built
What
out
a
a white
great.
label version. What he was great on is pivots, right? And so we pivoted.
Right.
One of the things I helped him with was pivoted the product so that you could create a white label, so real estate agents can create an ecosystem for investors and get it so that that it can get out in the hands of more people.
I love it. I love it. So there's niche marketing there, but then there's also the ability to pivot and adapt the systems that you're using in place. What a great idea there. We only have 4 minutes before the end of this show, and I feel like we just barely skimmed the surface here. So you have been gracious enough to invite me on your podcast. So listeners who hear this, who'd like to hear the conversation continue, this is a sneak peek for that, so you'll be able to hear that. So since we're bumping towards the end of the show, I had a big question for you, which we may not get through the whole thing. I wanted to ask you about bootstrapping versus funding. You've covered stories on bootstrapped technology startups and funded ventures and that sort of thing. What are your thoughts on the best approach to financing a startup?
Wow, yeah, that's hard to deal with in 4 minutes.
That's a big question, yeah. And give me an answer that's this big.
Yeah, it depends. I think you look on your growth model and your ability to be able to scale. And if you're, for example, a real estate agent and you haven't proven out your methodology for being able to ingest clients, you don't know how you're going to handle doing all the showings, you might be able to scale to, like I was able to scale to 43, ish, whatever in the first year, but I didn't sleep, so if I would have dumped another $1 million in marketing behind that whole engine, I would have imploded because I didn't have proven models for success behind the scenes. So I think, when you're a tech company like the Hail Tale company, for example, them getting, now that they've got their systems in place and they're ready, I think they're able to start jumping in on financing to be able to throw some money on a fire. I think it's like this. If you have a fire already burning and it's sustainable, the wind's not going to blow it out, dump some kerosene on it. And that's what the money does. If you don't know and the fire is really small and it sometimes comes in and goes out, that kerosene might just flood it and it'll just put the whole thing out. And I think that's how I look at the money.
That makes a lot of sense. And we're overlapping on topics that you've dug into a lot on your podcast. And so this is great for entrepreneurs and business owners. One of the things that you mentioned that if that first year when you got 43 houses sold, if you had dumped $1 million of capital on that, you might have burnt out, right? Or you said imploded. And you hinted that this was because of not having those systems in place. And so you used the example from the business earlier that he's now got his business in place. You talked about the ability to scale. And so you won't be able to scale if you don't have these systems in place, right? So this Absolutely. Is all these are all very good actionable tips that listeners will be able to apply to their businesses as well. We are right here at the end of the show, so we will have to hit pause on this conversation and take it on to the show on Friday. I think we're going to record that.
On Friday, yeah.
But Steve, for what have I forgot to ask you that you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
Well, there's so many things that we've talked about that are great, and I truly appreciate you having on the show. One of the things for me is reach out to people when you're looking at your business who can give you something that's tangible first before you make a commitment to them. If there's anything that, in our space, there's a lot of people who say they can coach, they can help you. If they can't give you something that works for you and it doesn't cost you anything, they're not going to be able to do it when they start billing towards you. So work with somebody who gives you something first. And then when you're working with your clients, maybe use that as the same perspective.
I love it. I love it. Great advice. Steve, just right here in the last few minutes, for listeners who want to find you online or connect with you, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, so I've got it's stevehamoen.com/book. So Steve, HAMOEN.com/BOOK. And that gets you a half hour free time. So we can chat for a half hour and just kind of get to know you and see if it's something that we can help. My goal and mission is to help companies grow their revenue by 30% in 90 days or less. And in that half hour, I want to provide value for you so that you can walk away and say, hey, if that was the last conversation we had, you got some value. But if you say, I will need some more, then we can certainly chat about if that's possible that we can do it together.
I love it. And we're going to put that on the podcast notes as well. So if you're listening to this while you're driving, don't feel like you have to stop. You can go to the podcast notes. And with that, Steve, thank you so much for being on the show. Have a good rest of the day there.
I look forward to seeing you at a tournament as well.
Oh, yeah. I love it. I love it.